Welcome back and thanks so much for staying with us. Good evening. If you've just joined us, my name is Cindy Mabi. President Cyril Ramaphosa tackled the emotive issue of land expropriation without compensation as part of his oral reply to Parliament. Ramaphosa says the country cannot avoid to redress injustices of the past. President Ramaphosa says the opposition must stop using land reform as a red herring. He says there is no need to raise alarm bells over the threat to property rights as the opposition has done. Ramaphosa adds that everyone must come to the negotiating table with solutions on land expropriation without compensation.
Land is central to human existence. Land is about dignity. Land is an asset that supports life. For millennia, it has supported life, enabled the creation and the development of societies, and made economic activity possible. The dispossession of land of the indigenous people of this country is therefore what I characterize as the original sin that continues to constrain the realization of the potential of our people. We should be guided by the understanding that our Constitution, instead of being an impediment to transformation, explicitly demands of us that we take decisive measures to redress the injustices of the past that were given rise to by dispossession. I invite all those who are angry, all those who are anxious, all those who are uncertain, and some who are excited, and those who are inspired to be part of a finding of a solution on this issue.
If you listen to them.
President Ramaphosa tackled the uncomfortable subject of former President Jacob Zuma's legal fees. He also reminded the EFF that government programs such as the National Development Plan are binding for all parties represented in Parliament.
Of Justice and Correctional Services. Government has contributed 15.3 million to the personal legal costs of former President Jacob Zuma since 2006.
Altogether, your 54th National Conference, it fundamentally changes what the NDP stands for. Why do you want to insist that you are being guided by the National Development Plan, which is radically different and contradictory in many instances to what your conference has resolved? What do you stand for?
What we really stand for is what will advance the interests of South Africans. The NDP is the policy that we have adopted as this Parliament. I just want you to remind you that you are a member of Parliament. We are all members of Parliament. This Parliament adopted the NDP. The National Development Plan is a living document. It's not a static document. It is a living document that we need to look at consistently and continuously to see what we can take out of the NDP in order to improve the lives of our people.
And joining us in studio is Professor Sipho Siepe, political analyst, Kim Heller, political analyst and contributing writer with our sister publication, The New Age, and we'll have Sfiso Mahlangu, group political editor, and Professor Peri Hanyani on the line, and Opa Matebula, political analyst, on the phone line as well. Good evening to our guests, and thank you so much for joining us. Do you think that President Cyril Ramaphosa was able to pull the charm offensive in Parliament in how he fielded questions, Kim?
Thank you. Lovely to be here. I don't think so. I found what he said very disappointing, but I was not surprised. And if I can launch directly into the issue that he covered on land, I think that we saw once again his talk, which has been clouded with doublespeak, easy speak, and terms and conditions. And I was quite alarmed today to see that the way that he discussed land expropriation without compensation was as if it was a policy instrument, one of many policy instruments to exercise land return, or what he called land reform, which has not worked for the ANC. So he seemed to treat it as an instrument, a policy instrument, rather than an ideological undercarriage of the new policy mandated by ANC branches. So the soft talk is worrying me. It's as if the white community and the markets remain as the main congregant of the ANC. And I thought the talk that he spoke, his talk on fallow, unused land was very, very problematic. I don't believe that is in line with the spirit that we heard from the ANC conference in December. And if that is the approach that he's now touting in Parliament, I think it speaks to the fact that blacks are going to remain as squatters on their own land, or at very best on crevices that white people do not want. And I think that should send big alarm bells. So I'm sorry to start on a very negative note. It's my honest discourse, and I was very disappointed.
Yeah. Did you also get the sense that we're almost being placed in another process of, let's say, call it the second CODESA, if you will, that will unfold gradually over another 23 odd years? Professor Siepe?
Yeah, I think the president is in a difficult position. When you want to please all the people, you then get into doublespeak. He started very well by positioning it as an issue of human dignity, as an issue of assets, and taking it back to millennia, so indicating that the land had always belonged to people, and that we have this original sin that we must address. Then he moves carefully to wanting to assure people. But let's make it very clear. Transformation is not going to be a process where everybody is going to be happy. So this notion of thinking that you can bring some people in the same room and then they'll all emerge happy, it's actually nonsensical. The fact that the land reform has not progressed as quickly as it has done in the last 23 years has to do first with probably the incompetence of the ANC, but at the same time it has to do with the resistance. The so-called market deliberately made sure that the land becomes prohibitive, expensive, and we couldn't access that. So where there are interest, there's going to be a battle. But what he's trying to do is to come up with this Mandela-esque approach to say we can be all in one and we can move forward. But the Mandela's presidency is overrated, because at that time there was a 5 years of euphoria and he stepped down and not much was achieved. And we had not even begun to talk about the economy. It is only when Thabo Mbeki came in that we began to talk about the economy, and that's where you saw resistance. When people are always happy to join you for as long as they've got nothing to lose. But those who have something to lose will always resist. And it's important that, as Kim says, that you can't treat this as if we can be in the same room and then suddenly we'll find a solution. It doesn't work like that. Yeah. The real world is harsh.
Okay, let's get a view from Marty Bole, political analyst. We are hoping to have you in studio. In fact, Prof and Kim here were quite excited, but nonetheless, we'll take what we can get. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us. By invoking the spirit of Mandela, you're also getting the sense of, yet again, the majority black having to compromise and understand that there are other issues such as food security, the economy and markets that we need to take into cognizance.
Good evening, and good evening to your panel. Cindy, the elephant in the room is that we have to confront the issue, and it is a generational thing that we must accept in the final analysis, that when Cyril made sure as a president that he raises the question of land expropriation, he is just saying enough is enough. There's a thorn in this country, and the thorn is beginning to say to us, let's deal with this issue once and for all. And to me, every debate that has been dealt with previously, in terms of the land, in terms of postponing, in terms of dealing with everything, the buck stops here. The elephant in the room is that there has to be a discussion, and Professor Siepe is right to say that the buck stops here. It's either we deal with this issue or we forget about it. And I want to raise this narrative or a particular discourse imperative. It is key for us to be able to say, when we debate this particular issue, as Malema has said, we should not even be apologetic to be able to say, what is in it for a black person? Because a black person since 1913 up until now has never ever raised a land issue up until today. Now, everybody, it's not a racial issue, it's not everything. A black person is saying, I'm an indigenous person, I'm at the center of this particular discourse. You came here as colonialists, you came here and did whatever that you did. And I'm asking myself a question that after so many years as a black person, what is in it as a naturalized citizen in this country? And that's a discourse narrative, Cindy.
Yeah, and yes, Mr. Mathebula, the reaction that he gave to the opposition is saying that calling for a sense of calm, that there isn't going to be the swart gevaar that is coming for your land as a white person, and that is essentially distorting from the real issues of dealing with the injustices of the past. How do you react to that?
Well, to me, what Cyril was very timid, was very apologetic at some point as the president of the country, but he was merely saying, we're not going to create a racial discourse on this particular issue. And he hit on the mark by merely saying that if we remove the racial connotation of this particular debate and begin to say, do we sustain poverty as the African National Congress in terms of saying that we're protecting interests of other people? And do we define democracy as a prejudicial instrument that prejudices everybody except the poor person that is a naturalized and indigenous person of this country? And that it begins to reflect and begin to say that the center discourse will be able to say that who are the poor? The poor are the naturalized citizens of the country. So Cyril is saying the periphery now should be those who are privileged, which is the white middle class, which is the rich, which is everybody that is owning land. But the center now, from the periphery, should be able to say, if we centralize the poor, who are the majority of this country, and begin to shift the periphery, which was the center anyway, of white privilege and everything. So he's saying we're shifting this to become the periphery. Let's deal with the center. Otherwise, we are heading into a situation and circumstances which are going to be unbearable. And this thing, it is a time ticking bomb.
All right, Mr. Mathebula, we're going to leave it there with you. Opa Mathebula, political analyst, joining us on the phone line. Thank you very much for your time. We're also joined by Professor Perry Hanyane, political analyst on the phone. Good evening, Professor Hanyane. He's also with the University of the Northwest. Good to have you. Is it possible to achieve a land equality without the land expropriation without compensation in light of using land that is not necessarily occupied or that is not productive, and that we can all share somehow in dealing with this issue of land?
Good evening, Cindy. Good evening to your panelists and the viewers at home and elsewhere. Look, I think the course of subjecting the issue to some constitutional process, in particular the constitutional review in Parliament, is a justifiable one. And I'm looking forward to observing due process being followed here, and that is consulting as many stakeholders as possible, making sure that there is some measure of consensus established. It's going to be difficult given the fact that it's an emotional issue by nature. It's an issue that tends to revoke sentiments that may not be pleasing to others, but also bring certain expectations that must be measured in a reasonable scale. I'm not too convinced that this year alone we will see a finality to the issue. We are likely to drag this given the fact that, after all, 23 years to democracy, there was a lax approach into the whole matter. And I'm suspecting that it might drag further until such time that some measure of solution is found. It's not going to be easy, Cindy. It's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and a lot of thinking away from the hype and the high emotions that unfortunately are beginning to characterize.
Professor Hanyane, to quote Mr. Mathebula earlier on, and I paraphrase in the sense that it still seems to be a burden largely that is carried by the indigenous natives who are inherently the custodians or even the benefactors of this particular land, that we're being apologetic, and that's what came across in the Q&A today.
I wouldn't suggest so. I think the president wanted to adopt a rather cautious, somewhat reconciliatory, balanced approach. I mean, it has been said before that the issue of agricultural production, for instance, must be measured to the extent that the issue of land is addressed. You've got to deal with it. And not only the agricultural sector, but the industrial sector by and large. So some measure of balance must be struck. And yes, my sympathy lies to the ideology that indeed the majority has suffered for quite a long time. But again, how do you balance
Hold on,
that?
Professor Hanyane. Professor Siepe has got a response to you. We also welcome Sfiso Mahlangu, who's political group editor for ANN7 and TNA. Just your response, Prof.
Yeah, let's not beat about the bush. What the presidents did today, beyond the doublespeak, was also to give us numbers. That as we speak, 72% of land is in white hands, and black people only control 4%. And black people are a majority. And this is, as he said, is an original sin. And there is going to be a black and white thing because the people who are disadvantaged are black. So the issue is, the reason why the ANC took a position that it took is because of the failures of the previous efforts of land reform. So there's clarity within the branches, within the ANC, within the EFF, within parties that are on the left, that this is a matter that needs to be dealt with. And this wish-washing around is not going to assist us.
All right. In the interest of time, Mr. Mahlangu, in your view that this whole collaborative speech and approach by the president dealing on very critical issues, primarily on the land, do you think that he answered the question around his ideology adequately that came from the EFF?
Well, what choice does he have except to be very reconciliatory and be very unionist and be very accommodating? He won the presidency in Nasrec, Mr. Ramaphosa, but he did not win the policy debate. In fact, he walked out with 0 so far as policy is concerned. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma won the policies of the day: radical economic transformation, the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, which has now subsequently also collapsed. She's also taken over the issue of mines. The mining charter was heavily discussed in Nasrec, and all other issues. The expropriation of land without compensation, an amendment to Section 25 of the Constitution. Within his campaign rhetoric, that's not a terrain that he entered. In fact, he introduced new things in Orlando, Soweto, such as the New Deal and other talks. So coming now to address, his followers, ANC caucus in Parliament, and his distractors within and outside of the ANC, how can he now dissolve something that he had told his followers would not work? So now he's got to borrow a bit from the EFF, borrow a bit from the ANC, people who believe in this, because it's something that he did not believe. And so now he's got to also speak a language, that he didn't perpetuate, things that he did not study, and perhaps things that as a man and a politician, he really doesn't believe, but he's got to enforce them because it is the language of the ANC and it is the policy of the ANC. So what we'll see in future is that, the policy will begin, and then there'll be measurements to try and detract the policy from time to time, as we see now with the mining charter, as we see now with the nationalization of the Reserve Bank. There'll be all these attempts to destabilize it because they didn't really believe it. So whilst he won the presidency, he did not win the policy.
But
I think
Professor
it's not
Hanyane,
going to be an easy tenor for him.
Yes, and I want to speak exactly about the
years.
separation of power. Is it, in terms of where the power lies? Did he come across today more as a South African president or as a deployee of the ANC? Of course, he had to assume that role of him as the country president. Professor Hanyane?
Look, I think he's got to build his own legacy, starting from these burning issues that have already preoccupied his presidential desk. And it's not going to be easy. Quite rightly, there are problems with regards to the differences within the ANC on policy matters. On the other hand, there's pressure, particularly from the EFF, to radicalize the implementation of these policies. It's difficult, Cindy.
All right, Professor Perry Hanyane, political analyst, thank you so much for joining us. Kim, your response?
Yes, absolutely. I think that we heard some intelligent questions or positions from the opposition today. The one came from the chief whip of the EFF, who posed the question, what does the ANC stand for? And I think it's a question we need to ask right now, because in December we thought we had clarity but we have not seen anything that is mirroring that motivation. And secondly, there was an MP from the DA, and he said Ramaphosa is a president without power. He's a president in paralysis. And perhaps he is, because the reality of the situation, he's almost operating within what I would call a quicksilver of unity. But there is no unity in the ANC. He won, I think as a professor says, on a razor-thin margin. And nothing has changed that. We can't pretend that unity exists. Neither can we, Sandeep, pretend that unity exists in this country. And the statement that the President said today that I disagree with completely is that it is in our DNA to work together. That I disagree with completely. The DNA of this country is one of destruction, of economic subjugation, of plunder. And unless we face that, and unless the ANC faces that, it is going to face its biggest crisis.
Do you think that we're
ever.
riding again that whole Mandela reconciliatory period where the world applauds us, we're revered because of our ability to overcome what has been defined as the worst atrocities against humankind, from apartheid to democracy, that it is now assumed that this is generally how we'll approach match?
First of all, that reading is a distortion of history. What we had was a struggle. People went to jail, people died, people were maimed. And what we had was a balance of forces that led to us having to talk. It was not because there was a DNA of wanting to work together. And if there was this DNA, why is South Africa today mired in conditions of squalor while other people live in opulence? Why do we have these inequalities? Why do we have this poverty that affects only one group? So there's some things that we must actually see them for what they are. They're just, they make no sense. They are just nonsensical. So the struggle and progress only occurs when there is a push, when you have the mass mobilization as an instrument that pushes a policy. And the ANC came up with clear-cut policies. But as Fizz was saying, that what we see now is an ANC that is unable to advance its own policies. Actually, you have an ANC that is going to be embarrassed by the opposition. I mean, they put a motion on SAB, the South African Reserve Bank. The next thing they withdraw it, they say going to consult. And some of the members of the ANC were asking, who are you going to consult? Because the branches of the ANC have spoken. So Floyd Shivambu was actually correct to ask the president, which policy do you stand for? Which one? Because if you don't stand for anything, you will fall for anything that comes.
And that fake unity, as you were saying, well, that is in Mercury, was questioned around his character, in whom he associated with around his campaigning, the likes of former MEC of Gauteng, his name came up, that he is perceived again to be a people pleaser, an all-rounder wanting to be liked by all.
We must go back to Nasrec and then maybe respect the 5,000 delegates who stayed there for almost a week. And many of us just camped there, and this was the recommendations and the policies that, you know, the ANC claimed to have been adopted. If you read the adoption policies of the 54th National Elective Conference of the ruling party, it's got nothing like sub-clauses or subtext. But now when they speak of land, suddenly there's an introduction to, we will expropriate land, comma, as far as it does not affect food security, as far as it's done in the ambit of the law, comma, as far as it promotes social cohesion. All of those things were not discussed at Nasrec. The policy was adopted, we will expropriate land without compensation. The matter of the Reserve Bank had no commas to suggest that we'll make consultations, because the consultations had happened with the branches. Now this, you know, the sudden reaction is there's going to be an economic task team, a mineral rights task team that will consult and run the avenue to see you know, the reserves of this country, and if this policy is feasible. That was not the discussion of Nasrec. According to the ANC's constitution, there is 6 months between the policy conference and the elective conference. So when a policy is discussed at the policy conference, which happened in June, they have 6 months to make all those recommendations, all that analysis, all that consultation, so that they can adopt the policy 6 months later, last year, which was in December. However, this was was not the case. After these policies have been adopted, in a paradigm move, the ANC suddenly saying, well, we're going to get other experts to come and see if the ANC itself
Who are those experts? And as you were saying, what
truth.
really matters here are the branches and the resolutions that were taken, and going forward, the implementation of such to ensure that we do have a semblance of an equal society. And Prof, in your view, I mean, he's spoken about a number of other things, bringing in the National Development Plan, saying that this is almost like a roadmap of that sort of radical transformation we want to see.
Yeah, the doublespeak must be expected, but we must also accept that the ANC is a contested terrain. But what's emerging here is that we have a doublespeak that undermines the resolutions. And it is the duty of the ANC members to start raising these issues, that in as much as we are told that we must accept the outcome of NASREC, it must be accepted in totality. And one of the things that they said they must accept the leadership that came out of there. They must also accept the resolution. So you cannot have it both ways. You cannot accept a part of the resolution that favors you, and the next thing you ignore others. So the ANC must resolve that level of doublespeak that is actually emerging, where the adoption of the conference outcomes is tentative, is not total. And this is issues that are beginning to emerge. But the opposition parties, if you were to see them today, they are also trying to find a way of managing the new president. But one of the openings that they have is really to embarrass the ANC about its own resolutions that seem to be more about the radical economic transformation, which are meant for the benefit of the majority that had been excluded.
Very briefly, my queen, I will end it up with you that this is his maiden Q&A. There'll be perhaps a change of mind or more tangible outcomes or programs in seeing the resolutions of the ANC fulfilled.
I think my final word is that the president must not defy the word of the branches, which was defined in December. He's actually diminishing and defying their voice. And he's insulting the voice of branches by now seeking other opinion. He's also insulting the voice of branches by speaking about bringing a character like, well, not a character, a person like Julius Malema back, because that is diminishing leadership within. And I think the ANC branches and members are asking, what about us? Our voice is not being heard. And now, when you're seeking advice, you're going outside. It's a fatal error for the ANC.